time, I would like to introduce our speaker to start off this week. Our speaker this evening is from Michigan. She's currently the executive director of the Michigan Consumers Council. She's been a state senator very recently, is an assistant to the recreational director of the cities to Kalamazoo and Dearborn, and has been a teacher and counselor and served on the Michigan Youth and Parole and Review Board. Along with her many other activities, she has also served on the President's Committee for Retardation and the Indian Affairs Commission on the Michigan Women's Council. I'd like all of you to meet and listen to a very interesting woman, Mrs. Lorraine Beebe.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. We got into such interesting discussion that I just as soon sit out there and talk to Paul, and I'm sure that maybe you would too. But it's a real pleasure to be here, and this weather is just like it is in Michigan, so there doesn't seem to be any problem of adjustment as far as weather's concerned. I'm pleased to be here this evening and to have the occasion to welcome you to an opportunity to discuss and make decisions for action on some of the most important issues in the area of consumer protection today, and really to help determine the direction of consumerism and the future. And seriously consider the legal survival in the marketplace. Is it legal survival that you want, or would this possibly lead to denial of choice? Now, I emphasize the word opportunity because too often in the past the consumer movement has been regarded only as a threat, particularly to those in business such as what we identify as provider and producers in the community. Now, consumerism is unlimited in its scope, its depth and breadth. I've been in the consumer, specifically in the consumer field, approximately 2 years as a director in the state of Michigan. And the tremendous change that has taken place as far as the scope of consumerism is just phenomenal. And I think a great deal of it is because people are beginning to realize that it's very much related to the quality of life, the expectations that we have. Now, you know, it is the key, really, to a way of life, and it is the key to the American dream that we have of the quality and quantity of life. And consumerism has the potential, and I was saying this to a group in Michigan the other day, and I don't know as they accepted it, and possibly you won't, but the horizons are fantastic of when we say consumerism. And the potential has only really begun to emerge, and in fact we got a great boost about 6 months ago, which was precipitated by the energy crisis. Now, John Gardner observed that we are continually faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems. Consumerism appears to many to be an insoluble problem, and many believe that it can be resolved only by government taking over through laws, through enforcement, and regulation. Now, to many others, now is the opportunity for a unique partnership of government, consumer, and private industry to be equally responsible and responsive to their own expertise to meet not only today's problems, but those of tomorrow, without the constant supervision of Big Daddy and his spawning arrogant bureaucracies. Maybe some of you questioned, and because the fact that I have been in the legislature, I am very much involved in political movements, and I'm very much involved in legislation, why I am saying that Big Daddy and all the little daddies in the 50 states, I don't want them watching over my shoulder. I believe very definitely that I want to make my own decisions. Now, the mission of cooperation requires that in each case that we take action which is believed to be the greatest in public interest, and this is the basis of our democratic philosophy, that it must be satisfying to the majority. I believe in the principles that established and have sustained this nation for so many years, and I know, and I believe completely, and I'm not naive, you can't be in politics and stay naive very long, that we can meet these challenges that are facing us today. Now, I'd like to offer you some definitions or basic positions from which we can move into this week's discussions. And I'm sure that some of the things that I say you will not agree, but I believe too that through constructive confrontation, discussion, compromise, that we can come to resolution. So here we go. Who is a consumer? Well, we're all consumers until we become involved in another role, that of providers and producers. Now, it's this change in role that brings about endless debate and different definitions. I come from an area of the state of Michigan which has about 1/3 of the population, the urban area, Detroit metropolitan area. And we get into some real verbal battles on the definition of who's a consumer and who is not. So I ask you these questions. If you are a farmer, does this exclude you from being a consumer? If you are a professional, such as medical, dental, engineer, teacher, do these exclude you from being a consumer or to represent consumers in areas other than where your expertise lies? If you are married to one of the aforementioned, does this eliminate you as a consumer in the field of your spouse's profession? And being very much involved with the women's movement, this really teed me off when I was told at a consumer movement meeting that women could not, whose husbands were professional or whose husbands were farmers, that they could not be consumers, that they were really speaking for their husbands. And of course my reaction to that was, what do you think we are, completely no mind of our own? Can't we speak out? And I know enough about family relations to know that nowadays people are speaking out, and we do have a difference of opinion. But this is something that I want you to think about. The definition that we use in handling complaints in Michigan is a consumer means any person purchasing or renting any goods or services primarily for personal or family purposes. And to me, this means we are all consumers, for some of us, at one time or another. I'm what some people call a professional consumer. I'm an advocate. And so that although I have expertise in education and clinical psych and so forth, and in some other areas, I find myself representing the consumer, the state end of it, on many committees and things that which maybe I shouldn't be. But I'm not going to argue the point as long as I can get in and get my pitch in there. Now, each consumer, each one of us, has his or her own level of expectation for the quality of life that we want. And this life must be meaningful and fulfilling to all of us. And this is the basis of consumerism. Now, the consumer may be a resident of the Skid Row, he may be the biggest bum on the Skid Row, or you might be the richest person in the world. But we have our expectations, each one. As consumers, we can be had. And believe me, I'm willing to bet that if I'd go around this room, there isn't a person here who hasn't been had sometime by a deal or something. We can be taken. I can enumerate any number that I fell into that looked beautiful. And if it's my choice, I want to do it again. But it depends on the deal. But some know what to do. Some of us don't. Majority of people don't know. And some people have an idea of what they can do, but they don't know where to go to get it done. So this is important. Now, they don't know their rights. And what are these rights? In the consumer movement, there's always been consumerism. It's been under different labels all along. But the consumer movement itself really became, we focused in on it in 1962 when President John Kennedy really gave the Bill of Rights of consumers. These are the right to be safe, the right to choose, the right to be fully informed, the right to be heard. And I've added two to these. One is I've added a right to an environment which will enhance and not detract from various lifestyles. And I added another, which is a combination. It's the right of the consumer to make choices and to accept the responsibility for making these decisions. Now, the first four are, I listed them the way most people do and the way you read them usually. But I would change one in this respect. The right to be fully informed is number one, and then the rest will fall into place. And the emphasis but should be on complete and total information. This means education in all its form. It's formal and it's informal, and from the beginning to the end. Now, if these rights, as I have given them to you, are carried out in a relationship developed between government, consumer, and private business industry, then the consumer can accept and should accept the responsibilities that go with making choices. Probably one of the most difficult things is to inform a consumer of his or her rights and how they should go and proceed to fulfill them. Then comes the question, what is consumerism? Well, as I said, consumerism is not new, as some would try to make you believe. It's been with us since the beginning of time. Upton Sinclair wrote about the filth and degradation in the meatpacking plants. He wrote it as a philosophical exercise, never dreamed that his writing would be used and would lead into the establishment of the Federal Trade Commission, which was established in 1913. And the new consumer awareness, as I say, arose in the New Deal days, ebbed during World War II, and turned to new heights with President Kennedy's statements. There are several that you talk to different people. I have quotes here from Senator Charles Percy. He says the consumer movement represents a broad public reaction against bureaucratic neglect and corporate disregard of the public, and goes on. James Bishop from Newsweek, consumerism is neither the creature of the radical lib nor of passing fad. It's basically conservative at the bottom and represents strong grassroots demand for a new marketing ethic in America. So we have all these things. Senator Magnuson says consumerism, a word used to describe the phenomena whereby purchases of goods and services are trying to attain a marketing system which makes the consumer sovereign, which guarantees him his rights. To many, there are other statements. Some have said consumerism is a word which was introduced by business and industry to scare off as a defense mechanism, and you go from that to the definition that consumerism is a grassroots movement. It is a needed and has been a needed social movement, and it's a good one. But we have problems. Consumerism should have, Dennenberg, whom I'm sure you've heard of, who is the Pennsylvania Insurance Commissioner, says that consumerism is not merely putting safety into cars or taking fat out of hot dogs. And when I say talk about hot dogs, I think of the Michigan problem we've had when the federal regulations came in and lifted our very strict meat laws in Michigan. And the hot dog created more problems for us in Michigan legislatively and in Washington than automobile repairs. So, and as usual, the feds won, but we still are trying to keep our hot dogs pure and pure beef. But that doesn't always work. But he also goes on to say that it's more than just this, that consumerism should have a more basic, have more basic purposes. Consumerism should aim for government and institutions of, by, and for the people instead of government and institutions of, by, and for special groups. Recently, I was asked to talk about the medicine man. Now, I'm not talking about the MD or the Indian medicine man, but the relationship of today's advertising marketing techniques with the medicine man of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th. The medicine man, my mother is 83 and grew up, or lived in Red Cliff, Colorado, which is above Leadville, and the train came through about once a week, if weather permitting. So the medicine man was very important to that little community, and it was fun to get her and her sisters to reminisce about some of the experiences they'd had with this man who came into this community, and his equipment was a wagon, yard goods, notions, pots and pans and doodads, and the main item, of course, was the cure-all. And if you bought it, you also got a gift. and some things that something we did, or I guess we used to, or I don't know whether we do or not. I've eaten Cracker Jack in a long time, so I don't know whether there are prizes in there or not anymore. But anyway, you talk about marketing systems. The medicine man, in order to sell his wares, identified the need of that particular community, identified it by a very simple form of market research. He visited the local saloon, he went to the general store, he talked to the village drunk, he got hold of the village gossip and the garrulous waitress. And then he adopted his wares, and particularly his sales pitch for the cure to meet the needs of that particular town. Now, in that day, there were good people, good men who did this, and they came to town year after year, and they were people that the community or the little village or town, whatever you want to call it, had to depend upon to get. But there was also the medicine man that came in to make the fast buck. And this person was the one who gave the rest of them the bad name. Now, of course, they could take care of the situation there. If someone came in and ran a fast deal on some of the people, they didn't hesitate. They just went ahead and tarred and feathered them and sent them out of town. But I can't see us doing that in Detroit. Although we are having our streakers too, we haven't caught them to tar and feather them. At the beginning of the 20th century, though, we found a tremendous change, and we began to live in the world of miracles, one tumbling in right after the other. And in reviewing these things, if people had filed requests in 1900 to scientists, engineers, industrialists, requests such as, we would like increase in locomotion. We'd like to be able to travel over the land faster than a human body can carry us. Well, the request was fulfilled. We have the automobile. If we wanted our power of speech to be magnified and channeled according to our wish so that we could talk personally to our family and friends anywhere, anytime, well, today is the exception if we don't have more than one telephone in our homes, and we also find more and more cars with telephones in them. If we could have wished for the power of hearing so sensitive that we could listen to music, public speeches, while sitting in our home or anywhere else, the answer came. The miracle, the radio. If we'd wished for vision extending across cities, fields, mountains, coming from great distances, and I've thought of this when we watched the astronauts on the moon, and we see the broadcast coming via satellite, we have television. So then we want to travel faster than the birds, faster than the speed of sound. We travel by jet. And in fact, we can stop and wait to hear ourselves coming now. We travel so fast. So what's the next thing we want? Well, we'd like to have relief from all the hard work that we've experienced. So it's interesting to note that today our country now generates enough energy to place at the disposal of every man, every woman, every child, the mechanical equivalent of 400 slaves. We want to live longer, so we've asked the biologists, the scientists, the medical people to see if they can extend our lifespan. And they have, and there's no end to what can be done. Now, you may ask why I'm taking the time to enumerate these miracles. Well, that's because most of us living in this amazing world haven't looked at it objectively and are unaware of the rapidity of change, of the impact of change, the increasing expectations, hopes that piled unprecedented burdens on man's understanding of himself, his society, his personal social values. So now we see that he vacillates, and he's tossed by the winds of many choices as he seeks the promised quality of life. Expectations that we might have dreamed about have become necessities. And when we can't get them, or they aren't what they are guaranteed to be, we become frustrated, angry, hostile. And if our frustrations are not appeased, many people, the only recourse they feel is to act. Now, today's consumer has been caught up in the middle of all these ever-increasing miracles with a rising conscious need for improving personal status, and to do this, each person must be prepared to make wise choices in the marketplace, and this is the basis. The consumer finds it very difficult to make choices because his education and his training trails all other changes. We are not ready to cope with these tremendous changes in our way of life. The multitude of choices, the bombardment of the selling media places immeasurable pressures on the human senses of hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, all accelerating what I call the want and the need drives, or need and then want drives. Reverse that order. The frustrations come out of that want. First we want something, and then we say that it's a necessity, drives our quality of goods, guarantees that really work, warranties that really work, product safety, service durability, responses to legitimate complaints as quickly as possible, correction of false claims in health services, labeling, credit, and today we add shortages. We want to know about what is going to happen. The energy crisis has been forecasted for a number of years, but consumers continued on with the hope of new miracles. We have been conditioned to the idea that just around the corner there is an answer to a problem and it will work out, so we just go on our way. Well, we've been caught and caught short. Now, there are people who say there isn't an energy shortage, that gas is available. Most people are moving on the premise now that there is an energy crisis. Legitimate or illegitimate, we may as well make up our minds and try to adjust with it. So we find that some people are saying that it's really a blessing in disguise, one that will make us all slow down and begin to reevaluate our goals and objectives, which means that there must be an acceptance of limitation at this time on the miracles. And there is a change, there's a profound change and a shift in our attitudes and way of, and really there's a shift in attitudes on way of life, and it's emerging and it's coming out very strongly. I have the privilege of doing a great deal of traveling and listening and participating in discussions, and I find that already people are beginning to think differently, and the attitude of the consumer is at this point pretty good. I don't know what will happen if we find that we've been taken, but we've been taken before, and I suppose we'll be adjusted to that. But my point is this, that people are, and I'm wondering if, and I think really, you young people, probably, whether you were aware of it or not, have probably begun to adjust long before the crisis, energy crisis, because many have turned to a more simpler way of life where money, and not that money isn't important, but where the material things are not that essential, that you have to have different kinds of satisfaction than becoming a vice president of one of the major industries. There must be acceptance, I say, of the end of these miracles, not a total end, but maybe a slowdown. And we must recognize that the United States is just not an isolated nation, but a part of a global economic structure, and as this has been very well demonstrated with the Arabs cutting off the oil. And that this brings with it a multitude of issues, problems, and a need for full understanding and acceptance of the responsibility of resolution. Survival, is it to be through legal channels or to be worked out by those who know what the problems are, and we say, okay, let George solve them, or do we do it through cooperation and a combination of effort? There are those, as I've said, who believe that the only way to meet the needs of consumers by passing laws enforcing strict adherence to the law. In fact, the letter of the law rather than the spirit or the intent of the law. In Michigan, we have passed a number of good laws, and we have legislation pending, which is very important, where the intent of the bill is not to be destructive or not to be legislation which will be denial of rights, whether it's a consumer or whether it's industry, business, or whatever. But wording is such, and I've done enough with bills to know that the intent of a piece of legislation can be very easily misconstrued, and the intent can go a different direction. And we often go back in discussing, well, what was the intent of that piece of legislation? And it's very hard sometimes to find out exactly what on. So if you are watching, and if you are concerned, and you should be watching the legislation that is being introduced in the state of Iowa. Because not only in the consumer protection area, but in all areas. Not only that, but also in Washington, because legislation is pending in many instances, which will have a tremendous impact on the individual states. We have up the Consumer Protection Act, which is the act giving the Attorney General the right to enter in on fraudulent cases. He already has, but he has some limitations. This bill is being batted about because we have a Republican Senate, a Democratic House, a Republican governor. The Attorney General is elected, and he's a Democrat. The Secretary of State is a Democrat, and the Department of Commerce is headed by a Republican. Now you get those all together, and you've got problems. And the prosecuting attorney, or the Attorney General, may be running for governor, and so he's not going to give up anything at this point that he feels may be a good campaign issue. And of course, our governor has just announced that he's running again. And so then the whole realm of politics enters in, and you've got a new ball game. I was just saying to Paul, once you get in it, you really become addicted. I think sometimes the fact of going back home and becoming just involved with my cookbooks and things like that, and of course I don't have many to cook for anymore. I have St. Bernard dog and my mother and like that, but and she would appreciate my putting her second, but she puts the dog ahead of me. But but what I'm saying is this, that politics is something that every one of you should get involved. You should know what's going on, because legislation is going to be passed, which is going to be it's going to affect you, it's going to affect your family, and it's going to affect the children that are not here, that have not been born as yet. So the other part of the Consumer Protection Act, which I don't believe Iowa has, but from what was explained to me, the Attorney General does have a Consumer Protection Division. He may have it, but is the area of class action, and this is a very controversial area, and whether or not consumers can join together, and what is the process of joining together in order to get action in the courts. Another piece of legislation I've talked about is the generic drug bill, which gives pharmacists the right to substitute drugs of the same generic basis as the brand name prescribed by the doctor. This has been kicked around very hard this year, but it looks like it may make it out and become good legislation. Probably one of the most important bills to women is the one which gives a woman the right to obtain credit in her own name. And this has, as I explained to the class today, we've had problems, not with the bill, really, but with the chairpersons of the subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. This man is anti-woman's rights. He believes in keep them home, barefoot, pregnant, and of course he can't understand why any woman would want credit in her own name, and he's very suspicious of any woman who wants credit in her own name. Now, having been a chairperson of a committee, I know that it's within the power of the chairperson to keep any bill in that committee they want to. I remember we had 400 bills on health, mental health, and social services at one time in the committee, and it would have been very simple for me to bury a bill that I didn't like or I didn't agree with, or just not have meetings. This is not have committee meetings, because this is where most of the work is done. So what we've done, now this is to eliminate, it's just to say that no person shall be discriminated on the basis of, and we've added sex or marital status, and obtaining credit, that a woman should have be judged on the same basis as a man, her willingness and her ability to pay. We have found that women, single, married, divorced, and widow, often find doors closed when they attempt to obtain credit cards, charge accounts, mortgages, and other kinds of loans. Took me 7 years to get my own credit card in one of our large retail stores in Detroit. They kept saying, well, just keep it in your husband's name, just keep it. And as one woman testified at our hearings, her husband had died, and she was not on a fixed income. She had a good income coming in, and she went in to get her credit cards put in her own name. And without exception, she was told to leave it in her husband's name, all of them. And she said, but this isn't legal. I'm responsible. He's passed on, and so on. And they kept saying, well, no, just leave it in his name. In other words, you know, it might upset the computer, maybe. And but anyway, she said, well, supposing that I don't pay these bills, then who's responsible? And the person who was working with her said, well, your husband. And she said, well, then I will charge on these accounts, and then you can go and collect from him. But it didn't sink in to this person that, you know, how are you going to go? Where did he go in the first place? And secondly, how do you go ahead? But these are some of the things. And young people trying to get mortgages find it very difficult, young married couples, because they will not count, in most banks and loans operations for a mortgage, they will not count the woman's salary. Most of it is, they will not count the total salary. Some will count 50%. They do it on the basis, well, are you of a childbearing age? And if you are, therefore, you know, if a woman gets pregnant, she's out of work, therefore, we can't count your salary. Now, it has gone as far as in some states, and we had some evidence in Michigan, where some of the loan companies had asked for a letter from a doctor saying that the woman was on contraceptives and almost assuring that they would get the bill paid before they had a family. The senator that has the bill in committee, when I was talking to him about it, he said, well, so, a woman leaves her job. She's, I think his family has 7 or 8 children or something like that. But he said, I said, well, naturally, your wife is not going out to work, but if she had to, if something happened to you, she'd find it pretty rough to get credit. But what the point I was trying to make to him was this, that we also found in the hearings that in many cases, it was the man who lost his job or who became ill, and his salary was the one that was missed. So that can happen, whether you're male or female. Women cannot be discriminated against on the basis of anatomy. So also, at the present time, there's about 40% of the labor force in our nation made up of women. And we make, according to, without counting what the housewife should get, and that's about $13,000 a year. There's a new estimate. There's inflation there, too. There's about $70 billion that women take home in wages. So that actually women do have and are the #1 consumer in the nation. We do 70 to 90 or 80% of all the buying of consumer products. And as one man told me the other day, he said, yes, my wife spends all my money. And I said, well, that's fine. You look very healthy, you're well dressed, and I think you're very successful in your business. So, you know, she hasn't done a bad job. But if anything happened to him and she went out to establish her own credit, she would find that when she married, she lost her identity in the area of credit. So these are some of the pieces of legislation that we're talking about, and I don't know what you're doing in Iowa, but I'm sure that if you haven't handled these, you will be handling them, and they're very interesting things to work with. Nationally, legislation is not moving, and the action is going on in the states. But it seems to me that if you are truly concerned about what is going to be happening as far as our free enterprise system, the whole works, that you become very much involved with the political system and know what's going on. You don't have to run for office, but you should be very aware of the things that are happening. For instance, national legislation of which I feel that every state must be very much concerned about is the move now, and it's moving more rapidly, of establishing national health agencies which would be supervised by, there are three bills. One is the Rogers bill, one is the Kennedy bill, and one is the administration bill. In all probability, there will be compromise on all three, the Rogers bills being rewritten, and it will be rewritten more closely to the Kennedy bill. But just saying that possibly the Kennedy bill will be the vehicle which they will use to make adjustments. But this is going to have a tremendous impact on the delivery of health services in every state, because it's going to be federally funded, and how many states are ready to move into this area. The other is, of course, national health insurance. This is a little bit more off in the future. But these are the things that you, as consumers, must be concerned about, because this is the delivery of a kind of service. We had a state conference in Michigan and 8 workshops, and of the 8 workshops, the 2 that were the largest, well, the first one was health, and this was health across the board, and the second one, education. So I think those are pretty important areas, too, to be alert to. Abraham Lincoln said, I'm for the people of the whole nation, the majority doing just as they please in all matters which concern the whole nation, and for each individual doing just as he chooses in all matters which concern nobody else. I was very much interested in you know, there's a new law which the General Motors is ahead of it, I guess, where you put on the shoulder strap and the seat strap in your car, or you can't start it. And there is a regular business being established now of how you can have people come out and unhook these things. Now, you see, the law has said we have to do this, and they're taking them out and unhooking them, so that you don't have that crazy thing of the buzzers going, the red lights flashing, and you can't get your motor started. So, and coming in today, I asked if I had to put my seatbelt on. I didn't. But these are the types of things, and I'm just wondering what Abraham Lincoln would have said if someone had told him you had to put your seatbelt on before you can start out. The second alert, first alert is to be aware of the legislation. Second is to make sure that special interest groups don't pressure legislators to pass bills that may prove costly to the consumer in dollars and individual rights. Third, is the legislation protecting citizens from other citizens, or is it protecting each citizen from himself? Is this carrying protection too far? Is it espousing a philosophy that assumes there is a right way for people to live their lives, and that this way should be imposed on them whether they like it or not? And is this true? If this is true, and you accept this, then who's to make that determination? State legislators? Our congressmen in Washington? Well, personally, I believe that among the basic freedoms in any true society is the privilege of every individual to make a damn fool of himself if he wants to. And if you feel the urge, the right to live like a boob, squander money, drive the most disreputable car, join a pyramid club, which, as you know, this is really bad, forget about checking the guarantees and warranties, but let it be my choice. But after I have been given all the protective information that I need, then if I make that decision, then I am responsible. So it's a question of survival under legal controls or self-determination, and there must be a balance somewhere. We must all be alert to the possibility that those who proclaim loudly advocacy to the protection of the rights may be very intelligent, but often lacking in good judgment. And without good judgment, intelligence is like a bag with holes in the bottom. So you have much work to do this week before you can make decisions. Examine where and what consumerism is today, the present and the future, and determine realistic techniques to solve problems. 2, be truly productive in how to prevent problems. This is basic. One last warning. We are a society that believes in instant responses, instant success, instant coffee, instant tea, instant pancakes, and so forth. Let me assure you, and let me emphasize, there are no easy, quick answers to the issues that face the consumer today, but they can be resolved, and much will be determined by people, you and people like you all over this nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Beebe. We enjoyed the speech. At this time, Mrs. Beebe would be open for questions if anyone from the audience has them. And also after she answers questions in front of the whole group, you may visit with her individually. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah. I think that probably the only people who are really being heard in some areas of the halls of the Congress are those who are pushing for the Kennedy bills as they stand now, and they are very articulate. They feel that this is really being backed by the unions. I think they personally, and from people I've talked to in trying to work between the governor and this national legislation and the impact it would have on Michigan, the catastrophic illness, all the physicians' assistants, the emergency, I learn them by alphabet, I guess, but all this legislation is pending, and it's what the states can do with it. I would hope that the Congress would be realistic and realize that we should go slowly because, for instance, in Michigan, we find that the Public Health Department is very much opposed to the present legislation, which really would change the whole health system of the state. Until we can get some unity on in these areas and cooperation, that I don't think the programs would be effective anyway because there would be too many little bureaucrats fighting for their own positions. There is much legislation. As I say, the three major bills that were under consideration last week, and I'm not sure what's happened in the meantime, but the catastrophic illness is something which I think could be taken up individually as a separate item because this is catastrophic, and I've seen it happen especially with young couples who the mother is high risk and the baby is high risk and spends weeks and weeks and weeks in a perinatal center. So there's much to be done, but I'm afraid that too many Americans want the quick answer, the quick resolution, and will be accepting this when they really don't know what it's going to cost. As I understand it, some of the legislation would cost about $70 billion health legislation to put it into effect in total. I may be wrong on that, but I think it's approximately right. On tips? Well, the first thing is to decide where you want to go and make your application. Go in and get your application. Then if you have to have, and it's very difficult if you've never had credit, and they'll immediately ask you for your parents' or your husband's signature. But if you have an income, if you have, and you ask for a limited credit, and then you don't get it, then go back in and ask why. Now, if they tell you that you don't have enough financial support and like this, ask them to verify it. And you don't monkey around. You lay it on the line, and don't let the person that talks to you across the desk buffalo you. You just say, okay, if I can't get any information from you, I want to talk to the manager. You have to pursue it this way. If they turn you down and say that you are a bad credit risk, you have the right to go into the credit bureau where they get their information and ask to see your credit record. They have to show it to you. They have to explain the symbols. This is under the this is under the national credit legislation. They have to tell you what it's all about. Now, the next thing, if you are financially able to be eligible for credit, this is based on the willingness and ability to pay. This is the basis of credit granting, and they still deny you, you should take it up with the Civil Rights Organization of the state, as a Civil Rights Commission, or if you have a Women's Commission in the state, or it's associated with the governor's office, as we are, and this is the Women's Commission. We do follow up on these cases. For instance, we had one of the top men from Penny's in the other day. He flew in from Minneapolis because they had denied a woman credit, and she was in the process of getting a divorce, and he said that their policy has changed now. You see, if a woman, what happens in divorce, the man can continue to use the card, but the woman can't. Credit bureaus get all this information, and as soon as there's a divorce pending, the credit people are notified. So our recommendation was to Penny's and to Sears and all of them that when there is a divorce pending, that both man and woman come in and establish their own credit. But don't let anyone buffalo you. There are more and more credit reasons why. I mean, what I'm trying to say, what I'm back up now, they have to give you a reason for denying you credit. And if you find out it's on the basis of sex, this is discrimination, and you can take it up. Of course, Civil Rights Commission in Michigan is 2 years behind time, and so what we do is contact, and I speak of the Women's Commission now, we contact the business and say, what gives here? And oh, they move mighty fast. They get to us. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Many of the businesses, many of the major industries have a tremendous education program. Probably two of the outstanding educational programs is Sears and Roebuck, which is used in many schools, Whirlpool, which makes all sorts of appliances. Your automobile companies are putting out a lot of material. Business does have, but there's no coordination. For instance, if you're interested in some particular thing, you don't know where to go. So one of the jobs that I see government should be taking over, and I'm talking about my own department, is to be a clearinghouse of all education materials that's available. We have to be very careful as a government agency that we don't pick like General Motors stuff over the Ford stuff, because then we'd be accused of pushing a product that and becoming involved in showing partiality or being supportive of something. But we can pick those things. Now, for instance, Penny's information that they're putting out now does not have the Penny signature, our name on it at all. Sears is doing this. We find the oil companies, even before the shortage of gasoline, were doing a tremendous job. There's been just a load of material coming out on how to cope with the energy crisis, and the other day I met with some people in the farm area, business area, and like that. They're all doing an educational job, but they're not getting it together. So I see this as the government's role. Also, we're trying to get through mandatory education bill for consumer education in a multidiscipline area rather than in just homemaker vocational education. And at the present time, there's no money. They have a consumer education bill nationally. Legislation has been passed, but like many pieces, they have not appropriated the funds necessary to do it. So we're trying to get it through. We hope we would get it through for the secondary education, but really education should begin long before the youngster even enters school. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. These are the things which happen. Oftentimes, women, we have in fact, we have a number of cases going in Michigan right now where women have been denied promotion or even the opportunity to take examinations. I'm speaking specifically of state government. And in higher education, too. Women have been denied full professorships and like this. The cases are filed, and some of them are resolved. And a very, very good friend of mine, and also a member of the Women's Commission, won her full professorship at Michigan State University, and she's having a terrible time with her colleagues, who are all men. And she's getting all the assignments that no one else wants, and this is pretty hard to fight. Now, as we tell the women when they come to us, where there is, the evidence is that there has been discrimination, we warn them that their job could be eliminated. This is one way to get rid of a burr under the saddle, so to speak. They also could be made to look ridiculous among their peers on the job. They are denied, for instance, one of the women who has charged HEW with discrimination. They have people watching to see that she isn't a minute late on the job, that she takes just an hour for lunch, and that she has to have permission not just from the regional director, but from Washington if she's going on a conference. And we have to, when she worked on our state conference, she had to write a detailed report of what she was going to say and do. Well, now this is true harassment, and these are things that we have not been able to resolve. But when you can get groups of women's organizations to back you, or back the idea of discrimination, of identifying it as the NOW organization did with AT&T, where they proved that women had been discriminated against and they had to come through. Or that was Ma Bell. Yeah, that's right. And but it's very difficult, believe me, for a woman alone on a job to take the harassment that goes with it when you fight for your rights. And we've lost many women who started cases who said, I can't take it. And if they were ill, they had people at the house checking them to see if they were ill. It's a mess, and we hope to change it. Not that I'm aware of at the present time. We have only been in the discrimination of women on jobs from the Women's Commission for the last 2 years, and some of our cases are just coming up now. We have no legal authority, but we have a lot of power in the state. We can pull in women's organizations from all over. But it's also, you'll find that many women have found that the women who were in like situation, who wouldn't give them any support either, they say, well, I'm content, I'm not going to take this, I've got to be sure I've got my job. We had 2 instances where jobs were written out, and it was very hard to prove that it wasn't done because this was one way to get rid of the 2 young women who were charging discrimination. It's going to be a long, hard battle, and it can be bloody, but we'll win it. Yes, sir. The unions are probably one of the most discriminatory organizations in, as far as women are concerned. But they say that they have fewer women working for them, therefore the issue isn't that important. For instance, in the UAW, there are only 3 women on a national, in national offices, and the 2 of them are going to be retiring very shortly, and there have been no other women brought up to fill their places. So the union women are getting together now, and they're beginning to make demands. Probably one of the most those most guilty is state government. Yes, sir. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Women are, well, as I explained to the class today, I never realized it. I think unconsciously I knew what it was all about, women, discrimination against women, but I never realized how so-called intelligent men could get up to a mic in a Senate chamber and say that women were not as intelligent as men, women were emotionally insecure, and women didn't have the capability of making major decisions. And this is the key. This is the myth that women come up with. We're conditioned to lose, we're conditioned to, and we probably in the women's movement, our greatest obstacle is women themselves, who are afraid of being projected out and having to fight for other women. The Equal Rights Amendment, anything that's being done is give the woman the right of personal decision, and also that, and this has not carried over in private business, industry, or anything like that. It's very difficult for a woman to move in private. And I'm sure private business, I'm sure you've seen where a woman has made it. I pointed to a board of directors or something like that. It's all on a woman's page, her picture, the story of how she's really up there now. And then we run into the problem of what we call the queen bee syndrome, the woman who's made it, who likes it up there in that rarefied air with all those men, and who say, honey, I made it, you make it your way, I'm not going to help you. And this is something that we're all working towards, is one woman reaching out to another to try to bring her up. I read a statistic on the airplane this morning that 60% of graduating classes of the upper quartile being women, also their IQ and their abilities were higher than the men. Now, this could be debated, I'm sure, but having been a counselor in high school, I know the upper quartile of graduating classes usually have as many or more females as there are males in the upper quartile, but what happens to them? So that, now you're getting me off into women's rights. So, but it's all part of the consumer movement. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you for inviting me here. I'm sorry I can't be here all week to find out what you do, but I'm sure Reggie will let me know your major decisions, and good luck to you.
Thank you again, Mrs. Beebe. Before you leave, I'd like to run over the schedule for the rest of the week. I'm sure there are some things that many of you would be interested in. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the council chambers, there's a discussion on housing concerning landlord and tenant problems, building codes and housing codes, and etc. Vern Robinson, Andrea McClarty, and Sandy Munger will be in charge of this. At 8 p.m. tomorrow night, there will be a discussion on consumer problems. This is a case studies panel. And then Wednesday, we will have at 3 o'clock a meeting on advertising and selling practices. This will also be in the council chambers. At 8 p.m. that evening, we have a number of workshops, which you can go to any of these that you like. The first is money management. The second is insurance. Thirdly, taxes. And last of all, women's legal problems. On Thursday, At 3 p.m. in the gallery, there's a discussion on small claims courts, and at 8 p.m. there's a discussion in the gallery on consumer credit and financing. Tom Harkin and Dr. George Wallace will be giving the speeches here. We also will have an information booth open outside the Commons throughout the week, and Mrs. Beebe did bring some pamphlets along with her, which are on a table at the back of the room, and you can help yourselves to them as you leave. Thank you very much for coming.